How many people in this room is it your first blockchain-related meetup? Jared?
That's good.
Awesome.
Welcome.
Awesome. That's fantastic. How many of you people who was your first blockchain meetup, do you think if I called upon you to explain blockchain, what it is, would want to even try it? Anyone? You'll okay. Who should I call? How about, you know what, let's do that a little bit while we're getting ready to start in a minute. What is blockchain? Just what is this thing we're talking about here?
Trust.
Trust? What does that mean? Trust. Blockchain is trust. What is it?
The nearest thing to it. Like, so
what does that mean? Break that down a little bit.
So you can trust information coming from a third-party source. Like,
don't you trust information coming from Citibank?
well, I mean, it's in a different way, though.
No, no. Trust. That's definitely a key word. Anyone else got anything to add to that?
Yeah.
Just speak up so we can all hear.
Yeah. It's a distributed ledger constantly being verified with encrypted data.
A distributed ledger constantly being verified with encrypted data. Cool. What does that mean? Who can explain that?
All right, so I'm kind of new to this, and I'm reading this book.
What book is that?
The Age of Cryptocurrency.
The Age of Cryptocurrency. By whom?
This is by
Michael.
Paul Binya and Michael Casey.
Okay.
This was updated last year.
Okay.
I'm 80% done with the book, but from what I took away from this book, it's basically a distributed ledger in which transactions are done through this blockchain, and the people who are working behind the scenes are documenting this transaction. It keeps it transparent, and this transaction is recorded on a block.
Okay.
And how the information is protected is by encrypting the information in the form of hash values,
Okay.
and that's it.
And why is this a big deal? Why do we all
Transparency.
Transparency. That's
Protection.
cool.
That's it.
Disintermediation is a good word, I think.
Okay.
Disintermediation at every level. All right, so we're going to actually start. I don't know where those guys are, but it's past 6:30. So are we rolling here? All right, good. Hello, everyone. We're here because we're all interested in blockchain and related technologies. And before we start, I want to give a shout out to a couple people, to Edward and Alan, who are, where are they? I think they're out there, who organized this. The guys from PassChain and also beginner programmers, they've been doing great things organizing these meetups and getting people out to do Solidity programming, and now having something like this. I think it's awesome to be in Europe where we can just do this. We can't do this all over the place. It's really great. Also, thanks to Lucy for filming, Lucy McCormick. She came here from Boston to film this. That's really great. And where's Jess? Jess Lee helped out with some stuff too, like signing people in or just other stuff. So let's start by letting everyone here on the panel introduce themselves and say, who are you, what are you working on, what's your experience in blockchain/crypto, and there we go. Starting with Ram.
All right. Hey guys, I'm Rand Barouette. I've been building applications, mostly mobile, over the last 6 to 7 years. Built a few, sold a few. Got into cryptocurrency in 2013, and probably I'd say end of 2016, early 2017, started getting into actual blockchain technology as soon as I saw how Ethereum was developing quickly. And then I started working on PassChain, which is basically a platform for digitizing access, basically access control on blockchain. And that's kind of how I met Edward, and Alan, who isn't here. Alan is also a team member on that, as well as beginner programmers, and we threw this event together. We also throw events teaching Solidity, which is the language for creating smart contracts on Ethereum blockchain, as well as we throw events for Truffle, which is the leading web development framework on Ethereum. So I guess it's kind of summarizes me.
Cool.
All right.
Hi, I'm Josh Clayman. I'm a lawyer. I work for Morrison & Forrester. It's a global law firm. I run and I co-founded, and I'm leader of our blockchain and smart contracts group, which is a global group. we have people from across all of our offices. We have about 70 lawyers around the world in this particular practice group, from all different expertise, so like tax, investment management, anything you could really think of that would touch the blockchain or some of these more interesting recent developments that relate to blockchain. So some of what I'm working on now, I'm working on a number of token sales for clients. I also, I am working on hedge funds, with hedge fund clients that are interested in trading cryptocurrency, all kinds of transactions involving smart contracts, really, really cool stuff that's a lot more interesting than the work that I used to focus on solely. In my spare time, I chair the legal working group of the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance, and I also represent my firm in the Enterprise Affairs Alliance.
Cool.
Hi, my name is Rick. I got into blockchain stuff in November 2014, but before that I was working on applied cryptography stuff for a long time before that in the 2000s. I'm a blockchain architecture consultant, so I have a number of clients, many of whom you've heard of. I'm not going to go through all of them now. I worked at Consensus, I've worked at Monax. I run my own consultancy, Vulcanize, and yeah, I just work on a lot of different blockchain projects. I'm working on Omega 1 now with James. Yeah.
Hi guys. Yeah, I think it's working. My name is Bisert Dimitrov. I started with blockchain in 2013. What we developed first was a CFD type of contract on blockchain. Then everything transitioned into digital cryptocurrency exchange, digital asset exchange, which is a type of white label that you can run your own exchange. Doing that for the last 2.5 years, and things evolved into a lot of products and concepts for banks and institutions, which soon to be announced.
Awesome. And I'm James Andrew. I have been, for the last 4 years, really deeply into virtual reality, and I teach VR here through Playcrafting at Microsoft, and spent 1.5 years as a technical director at a VR company. But as exciting and awesome as VR is, blockchain is, I think, even more exciting right now. I mean, I still love VR, it's really cool, but VR is all about saying, here, let me entertain you, and I feel like blockchain is saying, hey, let's change the world fundamentally in a better way. And so I just, as of even right today, I'm just joining Omega 1, excited about that because I'm going to be working there to bring three-dimensional visualization into crypto trading, and eventually even virtual reality. I have a vision where crypto trading will one day possibly even be gamified and be like an e-sport. we'll see how that goes. I kind of want to build that. So given the number of people in this room for whom this is their first time out at an event like this, I think it's really important, as much as we probably might want to dig into like really deeper stuff like proof of stake versus proof of work and things like that, we really probably should just start and say, what is blockchain? Because not everyone in the room knows it, and what are we talking about? And we've had some answers from the crowd, but can anybody here give a good summary, a working summary of what blockchain is for the purpose of this event? Like what do people need to know if they just walked in here off the street? Go for it, someone.
I mean, the most important thing is that it is a chain of blocks. They are, the hash of the previous block is in the current block, and you rely on these hashes to determine the authenticity of a set of transactions. So the value of it is that you have effectively an irrevocable log because there is no single point of failure, because you have all of these different people who are full nodes operating on the network. You have the ability to verify transactions from counterparties that you don't necessarily trust. So it's a way of facilitating the transacting of data amongst people who do not fully trust each other. And that's its primary value and utility. And it turns out that sometimes even within the same bank, people don't trust each other. So there's a lot of applications.
Excellent.
I would add up to that, you can just consider it like an immutable single source of truth.
Immutable single source of truth. That sounds pretty powerful.
One sentence.
Okay.
Just to add on a little bit more, this is a very non-technical way of describing it, but
A little closer to the mic.
to add on to what you were just saying, very non-technical way, the blocks are arranged in chronological order, And if you imagine each block containing all of the information from the previous blocks, that kind of helps you to understand the blocks being linked and why you can't really go back in time and change something in the past. That's why it's considered so secure, really, to change things. You know, like, I won't go into all the details, but typically you would have to add a new block of information rather than going back and messing with the old block.
And I guess they pretty much touched on everything, but the main, I guess one of the main benefits is, like you said, there's no single point of failure. There's no single authority behind this chain. So that's pretty much why it's so revolutionary, whereas current systems always have a single, or even if it's not necessarily single, pretty much a centralized point where if things fail, the whole thing crumbles, right? For the first time, we kind of have the most distributed kind of ledger, I guess, in history.
Right, cool. Now, when most people think about blockchain, most people's first introduction to it was via Bitcoin, because Bitcoin was the first implementation of a blockchain, as published by this famous paper in 2009 by Satoshi Nakamoto, which nobody even knows who he or they is, which sounds like a science fiction story plot that I wouldn't believe, but that's the way it is. Nobody actually knows who wrote this paper, but the contents of the paper, everyone saw it and says, wow, this is legit, this works, and then there was Bitcoin on the scene. So Bitcoin is what you call a cryptocurrency. So we've got Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and blockchain. What's the relationship of these things, and how can you distinguish in your mind between Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and blockchain, the technology? Anybody?
I guess I'll start. Think of Bitcoin as an application of blockchain. It's like a use case of blockchain. It happens to be, I guess, the first. I don't know if it's necessarily the first cryptocurrency, but I'm assuming they were both invented around the same time. So
There were precursors, but I
Yeah,
think it was the first
yeah.
actual blockchain cryptocurrency.
It was the first.
It was the first decentralized one. Adam Beck made Hashcash before that. Chalm had his e-money platform that failed before that. The reason those systems failed was ultimately because they were used to commit fraud and they were centralized. So people could find them and shut them down. And pointing out fraud is this legal construct, right? So, you know, maybe you're doing a perfectly legitimate transaction with a country that the country you're in doesn't like, thus it's fraud, right? So I mean, legitimate from a moral perspective. So the value in a system like this for us as humans in a moral framework is that, you know, people we don't like or people who don't like us can't stop us from transacting our digital money, and that was like pretty much the major innovation there.
Anybody else?
Oh wait, what was the question?
The question is, all right, we've got Bitcoin, which is the prototypical example of a cryptocurrency, and there's
Yeah.
other ones, and we can talk about that too.
Yeah.
But then there's blockchain, which is the technology that cryptocurrency is, you might say, implemented in, and they're not one and the same thing. So how do you
Yeah,
distinguish them in your head?
not every asset that exists on a blockchain is a currency, and that's a pretty important distinction to make, especially from a legal perspective, and also from an exchange perspective. So it's important to distinguish that a lot of the things that we see, like if you look at CoinMarketCap.com, or maybe I'm Google it and maybe I got the name wrong, but you know, the top 3, top 4, top 5 of those are currencies. But if you go down the list, like Omise Go is not really a currency, Quantum's not really a currency. These are other types of crypto assets that are traded in this marketplaces along with these other things that are currencies. But either because of the centralization, ERC20 is fundamentally more centralized than a currency that's sitting on its own chain, for example. These things you know, differentiate the space and make for different types of assets.
Yeah, and in addition to tokens, which of course everyone's talking a lot about now, there are other completely different use cases for blockchain. Like if you think about this, sometimes people describe blockchain as a global spreadsheet that's operating on lots of computers, basically non-technical. And so you can actually use it to keep track of data and to share data and to keep one record that everyone sees at one time. This can be very helpful for things like supply chain management or from tracking inventory or materials across the world. So Walmart recently, in the past few months, had tracked pork across Asia.
Yeah.
And also, if you wanted to know, is my favorite champagne from the Champagne region of France, you could actually potentially track it along there. So there's lots of different use cases in trade finance, supply chain management, others, healthcare records, identity. There's a lot of different things that have nothing to do with cryptocurrencies or have less to do with cryptocurrencies. There could be some interplay.
Yeah, I know that it's being used a lot. Blockchain's being used a lot to track the legitimacy and provenance of diamonds, for instance, in a way that before there was all this paperwork that said, hey, this diamond is legit, it's not a blood diamond, something like this. And now people are starting to use blockchain to do that in a way that can't be forged. And so there's a perfect example of a use case like that. So Rick mentioned this term ERC20 token.
Oh yeah, sorry, I
Which,
just dove right in.
which is like, okay, who has heard of ERC20 token? Who has heard of, okay, that's like 5%, 10% of the room, okay? To understand what an ERC20 token is, we have to talk about the other major cryptocurrency out there. Well, there's many of them, but beyond Bitcoin, you'll hear about Ethereum. What's Ethereum? Because you got to understand Ethereum really to go much deeper into this.
Before we get into Ethereum,
Go for it.
I think we need to clarify that there can be different blockchains. Many people think there's just one blockchain. There are several different blockchains, and like every week there's a new one coming out. And they all have different consensus mechanisms, right? So right now, the consensus mechanism is basically what are the rules that everyone agrees upon to agree on this data, on this ledger, right? And so Bitcoin is on the Bitcoin blockchain, I guess I'll call it. And then now other cryptocurrencies, some of them live on a different blockchain. Some of them have created another blockchain for that token. So I guess that leads into Ethereum, right? All right, so Ethereum is, I guess, the second most popular cryptocurrency, but what it really is they created a new blockchain. So instead of just distributing data on this ledger, they wanted to do a distributed computer. To simplify, is basically, so imagine if you have you guys heard of virtual machines? All right, so basically it's a distributed virtual machine that lives across basically a ledger. So that kind of makes it so there's no central point of failure in computing, right? And Ethereum also has a token, which is currently traded. And that token is used to pay for gas, which is to write computational data onto this computer, basically. So that's a currency used in order to pay for the fees associated with writing data to this computer or using this computer, executing what we call smart contracts. I guess before should I explain something?
Yeah, I think yes, because you got to understand all these things to really get into this space. And if we don't yet, let's get the foundations covered.
All right, is anyone familiar with smart contracts here? I don't know if that's too far.
No, it's not too far. I don't think so. We can take smart contracts. We need to. It's important. What's a smart contract?
I'll let Rick answer that. I can answer it. I just feel like
Yeah, all right. So they're called smart contracts almost as a jab against Bitcoin because Bitcoin has contracts, so Ethereum has smart contracts. And basically what a smart contract is it's a program that runs, as Ram pointed out, across all of the nodes running in the blockchain all at once. So you pay Ether, that Ether gets converted into gas. That gas is then used to operate. Well, let's go a little bit about how a computer works. It's actually very simple. Well, I'm going to make it very simple. You have a list of instructions, which are data, and then those tell the computer what to do to other data, like add it, subtract it, or whatever, right? So you spend gas to put the data, both the instructions and the data itself, onto the blockchain. That gets distributed to all the nodes. Then the nodes, if you then send another transaction to actually run that contract, it will then process the data that you provided in the transaction as well as using the data that's already in the contract. And the benefit of that is like, let's say this gentleman here, well no, let's not pick that gentleman. Let's pick this gentleman here. I don't trust you, so I want to do some business with you, but I don't trust you. So normally, so it's like, I could run the program on your computer, but then I don't trust that you're going to run it honestly. You could run the program on my computer, but you don't trust that I'll run it honestly. So instead we run it on his Ethereum node, which we both trust, because there's a whole consensus algorithm, and there's all this proof of work going into making sure that the transactions are valid. And it's not just him, there's actually hundreds of people out throughout the world who are running this exact same computation, so that we can conduct business in spite of the fact that we don't actually trust each other. And so that's the main value of a smart contract.
To
Sorry.
And these run on Ethereum. These are the code that runs on Ethereum, the smart contract. You said that's one way.
So the way I typically think about it, you guys are definitely more in a good way than I am, but it might be helpful for those who may be less technical. A smart contract is computer code. It uses if-then logic to cause something to happen upon the happening of something else. So a simple way to think, if you're visualizing a smart contract and getting away from computer code, if you think of a vending machine, you put money in and you press the button. You don't need a person to collect the money and then to give you the candy bar. If the machine's working, push the button, the candy bar comes out. That's the idea behind a smart contract. So if you have data in the blockchain and you have kind of overlaid a smart contract, you can say, if this occurs, like if payment comes in, then this is going to happen. And you don't need an intermediary, you don't need a human, ideally. Of course, right now, we're at a stage where a lot of these transactions have to be relatively simple because some of the more complicated things that might require discretion, you still need a human. But that's basically how I think of a smart contract.
Cool. Anyone else?
think about it as we say it in the development world, the code is law. There is nobody ego bigger than the code. Whatever that you programmed, that's what's going to be executed eventually.
So the topic of this panel is how will blockchain affect our lives? The fact that these smart contracts and Ethereum exist, what kind of things are people doing with it? Why should we care? What can you do with a smart contract, and how will these smart contracts and blockchain affect our lives? And what's the relationship of smart contracts to blockchain? Do you need to have smart contracts on a blockchain, or not necessarily?
A basic example of what a possible smart contract, I'm sure some are actually in use right now. But let's say you wanted to make a bet on who's winning the World Series, right? I could make a smart contract, and it could be, we could somehow find a way to link it to like real MLB data to find out if who actually wins after the World Series is completed, right? What we can do is create a smart contract that says, if they win, pay out this person this amount of tokens, kind of like a bet. So now we can create a contract to place a wager, right? So you can send tokens into that smart contract. So we're going to lock in, let's say, 100 Ethereum. And if they win, we're going to pay you out twice that amount. And if you lose, we're going to transfer that 100 into our pockets. Basically like a simple wager. All that can be done instead of having bookies or some sort of centralized betting platform. We can just have a smart contract which will execute that automatically, and you don't have to trust anyone. Everyone will get paid, or everyone will lose their money if they lost the bet, or get paid if they won the bet, without any intermediary or anyone having to intervene in order to secure the bet. So that's just an example of a smart contract, but now you can see how that could apply for anything, whether it's insurance, payment payouts, whether it's, I mean, pretty much anything where you would normally need some sort of legal written agreement or someone to enforce a contract. If you could find a way using tokens to create, to create that agreement, then now you can build that on to Ethereum using smart contracts. That's kind of an example.
Cool.
Yeah, I can give you guys another example. It's a website called Eat the Risk. It's currently working as an insurance. You want to insure your flight. If, for example, if you're flying from JFK to Hong Kong, for example, and you're not sure if the flight's going to make it, you can. It's actually all automated with your wallet currently with MetaMask, with a Google Chrome plugin. You can actually make a prediction if the flight would land in time, and they will give you a percentage like insurance. So if the flight is delayed, it will automatically pay off. You don't need your travel agent to wait 6 days. It's everything is automated. You just get your money straight in your wallet.
another example of a smart contract that's in existence right now, and this maybe gets us back to the ERC20 tokens, is if you guys have heard about ICOs or token sales, or a lot of companies, rather than giving up equity, the founders instead are tokenizing, or they're issuing tokens. And there's a smart contract that's used in connection with the actual purchase of these tokens. I don't know if any of you guys want to kind of explain that part and how that fits in with ERC20. I'm sure you
I think this is a really good topic, the concept of a token and tokenizing something, and what does that mean and how does that affect our lives? Who wants to talk about that, right?
Yeah, okay, so Ethereum in essence is a token. Cryptocurrencies are tokens, but you can issue tokens for anything. So when we say tokenize something, you can issue a token to represent pretty much almost anything, right? There's people that are tokenizing the paperwork for legal titles for your homes or for your cars, putting that on a token and that you can trade, right? Because a token is something that belongs to a person and can be possibly exchanged with a person. So that can go. I mean, the possibilities are endless on that. So ERC20 is the token. That's in Ethereum. That's the format used for Ethereum tokens. And most of the ICOs coming out right now are issued ERC20 tokens. So those are that's like the standard format for most of these ICOs coming out. So let's take a popular ICO recently.
What's a good one? Omisego.
Omisego, yeah. So they issue a ERC20 token. So what they do is they create a contract for that where it's like, send us, let's say, 1 Ethereum and you'll receive 1 Omisego token, ERC20 token in your wallet. And there's a contract that governs that. So it's automatic. As soon as you send it, it's released to you. And they create contracts that kind of dictate the maximum amount of tokens available, kind of to create a cap on tokens. It issues what the rate is. It could be like for 1 Ethereum, you receive 20 tokens. All that's defined in the contract so that there's no middleman for it. And it's transparent. You can see that contract, see what you're going to receive by sending a token into that contract. That's pretty much how ICOs work. Have you guys participated in any ICOs? Yeah? No? We have one guy now. We have one investor in the back. Okay, yeah. So
Be careful out there.
yeah,
There's some bunk ones. But there's a lot of good ones too.
some of these ICOs, I mean, these tokens could be used for anything, right? Some of these ICOs are issuing tokens that have a use on the system, right? So like what we call utility tokens. Since tokens aren't necessarily a cryptocurrency, they're not necessarily equity, they might have a use in the system. For example, on an identity platform, let's say someone doing identity on the blockchain, they might issue tokens that might be used to receive someone's identity information. In exchange for identity information, you have to use this specific token. There are also some people who are issuing tokens that give you the right to vote for something. So it's like people who hold this token now have the right to vote on a change in the platform or whatever type of group. If you guys organize a group and you want to issue tokens for voting rights, that's possible to be as well. That's actually called a DAO. Has anyone heard of that? All right, it's basically a decentralized autonomous organization.
Yeah.
What people can do is issue tokens for voting. So instead of like, let's say, if you had a book club and you guys are going to vote on what's the next book everyone should read, everyone that holds a token can send tokens into a contract that kind of determines what's going to be the next book. And so now we don't need to worry about a central like leader to make the decision. We could just do like majority tokens can vote towards a particular outcome. And you can create all types of organizations like that and no longer need anyone particularly in charge to make group decisions. So that's another use of tokens. There are tons of use of tokens. I could go on. I'll let some of you guys.
one thing I want to comment on is when he says you could do this, you really could do this. I mean, this very room, Alan teaches a beginning programming class on Solidity programming, and I was amazed when I first discovered like actually how simple the coding for this is. Like to do a basic token offering, for instance, the code is not even that complex, and you can do this. So now a lot of people are doing it for things that maybe don't make so much sense, but it's really easy to learn, at least to begin to learn how to even code in this space. It's very exciting.
Okay, so one of the interesting things I think with the token sales, which is how I prefer to call them, because ICOs, even though that's what people call them, it sounds more like a security. So I think right now there's a debate because there's no bright line guidance between which tokens are securities, whereas which tokens are not securities. So you guys may have heard about the SEC this summer coming out with guidance. They focused on the DAO, which was a DAO that was launched from Switzerland. And you guys may have heard of it because it lost about 50 million in digital currency. So it had its problems way in the back. They gave all the money back, and ultimately that led to the hard fork of Ethereum that you may have heard of. So anyway, this summer the SEC focused on that, and they said, look, this token that was sold, they were putting a virtual venture fund on the blockchain. This was a security. It was not a non-security token, which is like a utility token that you're saying. And there's no bright line test for that. It's a facts and circumstances test. So some people, I won't go into the legal intricacies of this, but as you noted, let me step back a second. As you noted, many of them can be used within a token ecosystem. So within a platform, kind of like if you were to go into an arcade and you were to put your money into a token machine, and you were to take out the tokens and then put them into the games to play. That's one way of thinking of some of them. Others are just purely to raise money, and they're an alternate way of raising capital. So,
Very cool. Now, one thing that I think is really interesting is the idea that these tokens will one day become almost a new layer to the internet itself. Naval Ravikant, the founder of AngelList and CoinList, real well-known investor, he published this paper recently called The Fifth Protocol, and on it he says, cryptocurrencies will create a fifth protocol layer powering the next generation of the internet. Cryptocurrencies are an emergent property of the internet, almost a fifth protocol in the internet suite. If Satoshi Nakamoto did not exist, it would still be necessary to invent them. Someday they will be used by the machines in our network, on our desk, in our garage, and in our pocket to exchange value and achieve consensus at blinding speeds, anonymously, and at minimal cost. And what he's referring to with the layers is in the internet, there's already a bunch of layers of communication that happen from what you call like the link layer, the internet layer, the transport layer, and the application layer. It's all data, none of it's value. But now with these tokens, machines can transact these tokens, and there's a whole bunch of use cases that can open up from that. Does anybody want to discuss that possibility?
Yeah. I mean, with cryptocurrencies along with blockchain, now we kind of have a decentralized layer for exchanging like actual monetary value or value, right? So a lot of things can happen in the back end like that we couldn't possibly do before. So I don't know if you guys have watched the show Silicon Valley at all, right? Okay, well, one of the things that was brought up in the show was like a decentralized like internet. Like let's say if everyone's internet lived, like you could borrow internet data from someone else. So you wouldn't need to go through one central point. Like if we can all have our own like decentralized internet amongst all of us. Now it's possible because now we can pay each other for the usage of that internet through cryptocurrency. So you can imagine like not having to pay, let's say, an ISP in the future, like not having to pay, let's say, Verizon, or imagine if we're basically paying other people for using their bandwidth as you go along your day. That's technically possible. I mean, there's even people sharing electricity now on the blockchain, because now it's like if you could buy electricity from other people or electricity you're not currently using, you could sell on the blockchain. You guys can exchange cryptocurrency for that electricity, and suddenly you can create like decentralized like markets for stuff normally you wouldn't be able to sell or monetize. So one of the ways to go about this is the Internet of Things. Internet of Things is basically more and more of our devices are being plugged into the internet, are internet capable, right? They connect to servers. You're able to exchange data through them. I mean, we have smart locks. Amazon just announced that they're starting to allow people who sign up for the service to let carriers into their homes to drop off packages using like smart cameras and smart locks to give Amazon employees basically the ability to come in and deliver packages to your home even when you're not here. And this is all possible because of the Internet of Things, because all these things are connected to Amazon servers and they can facilitate that. Well, it gets deeper because now the more and more devices that are connected online, now we can pay for use of these devices, and these devices can also pay each other using currencies. So like things can function automatically. We can become more and more autonomous. And those are basically some of the possibilities he was mentioning. With IoTs, it can get even more functionality come out of that. I mean, imagine your car could just pull up to a gas station, and like you pull out the pump, and it exchanges from the wallet that's in your car, takes the currency out of it, and automatically pays the gas pump. You never even pull out your credit card. It automatically will know how much gas just filled into your car and just automatically pays the gas station. And everyone trusts each other because it's all on the blockchain, so no one can really like meddle with the transaction at all, and fair exchange can occur. I mean, it could know, and IoTs can detect that your car even got into the gas station to know to start the transaction. And then it can tell the pump to allow you to pump X amount of gallons into this car. It can detect what vehicle you have. And all that, your actual vehicle registration and plate number could be on the blockchain, so we could just bill it and send it straight to your house. I mean, these are all things that can occur just by having a ledger and basically tokenizing all that information.
So I think there's a very concrete example that we can all relate to, which is Facebook. So we all use Facebook for free. Facebook makes billions and billions of dollars off of us collectively. We don't have a means of, the way that the internet is structured today, we don't have a way of, there's two things we can't do. We can't find a counterparty to sell our data. Well, there's actually three things. We can't find a counterparty to sell our data. We can't host our data securely. And if we even found a counterparty, we couldn't receive payment in a cost-effective way. The minimum cost of doing a Visa transaction would make it cost prohibitive for us to buy and sell each individual piece of data we create throughout our day. But if we use a blockchain and similar technologies, we can actually do a number of things. One, we can keep our data private. We can keep it our own data. And then we can also create marketplaces where we no longer need a centralized authority to tell us which counterparties to trust. We can look at the blockchain and decide for ourselves which counterparties to trust and which counterparties we wish to transact with. And then finally, the crypto assets will allow us to then make these transactions small enough, cost-effective enough to actually do. So you can imagine a situation where you have an alternative social network, or even Facebook could actually do this. Facebook could transform themselves into like a decentralized version of themselves, which I actually think is more likely than an upstart coming in and just fully disrupting them. But the transaction would effectively be, you go about your Facebook business, this generates a whole bunch of data. This data is actually private, it's encrypted, and there's a marketplace where someone says, like let's say Pepsi says, if you prove to me that you've bought a Coke and that you want to buy a drink right now, which is easy to do with IoT, I will give you a discount on my brand instead of the other brand. And so you can imagine, as Americans, so much of our life is lived through advertising and marketing and brands and all these things, and we'll be able to fundamentally transform how those systems interact with us on a personal level, which will hopefully increase our autonomy and self-determination. So I think that, which was also a big theme in the internet. I mean, when TCP, for those of us in the audience who know what it is, was invented, they actually wanted to create a field for payments, and they just said, oh, that's too complicated, let's not worry about it. But if they had done that, then we wouldn't be here right now having this conversation, because that is the promise that blockchains are fulfilling. Is they're fulfilling, this idea that you could have this electronic payment that's that's decentralized and disintermediated. In the IETF and W3C, I've been on committees at both groups working on blockchain payment standards. So it's definitely, and the web payments body, which has been around forever, is looking at blockchain technology to solve the problem that they've had literally since the web existed.
So this all sounds awesome. We'll go for it. Yep. Go.
Okay, so to further on the Facebook case, payment is great, but what is value for Facebook? And you guys can actually use it now. You can log in with Facebook with your identity on Facebook. You can log in somewhere, and if that identity is stored on a blockchain, you can actually authenticate securely with your phone and with your wallet anywhere you want. You have one identity you can create. Because you're controlling your identity, you can create several representations of you. For example, like public one, you want to appear in your school. For example, you can have like a different identity that you want to buy something else. The identity case, apart from payments, is I would say the prime example of blockchain for us for moving forward. And even now, United Nations are working on a proof of concept there for the unbanked people. It's I think that's what. I don't know if it's going to adapt faster than the fintech in terms of blockchain, but definitely identity is the prime example of use case that's what we.
You mentioned two very important things there: identity and the presence of there's 2 billion so unbanked people in the world. I mean, 2 billion people do not have any access to banking, and a lot of times that is preceded by the fact that they don't have any concept of identity. They're not in the system. But most of these people have mobile phones, oddly enough, and so that's a place I see where this can dramatically impact people's lives. And I know Celsius, who's not here tonight, but they're working on that, this idea of being able to enable lending to people that are otherwise unbanked, banking and lending. And so I think that's very, very exciting.
Specifically in the countries where you don't trust the government.
Right.
You want to just deliver money or subsidiary to the people directly. You don't want them to be through several steps, several channels.
Yeah, and they can't come out one day like they did in India a few months ago and said, by the way, all the 5 rupee notes are invalid. they're just, you don't have them anymore, and that can't happen in here. It's very, very interesting. Any more? Okay, here's a question to kind of dovetail into that. This all sounds awesome, like blockchain, the way it's going to help our lives and the way it promotes so many honest practices, really. So who stands to lose? Who's going to not like this, right? And let's say somebody doesn't like this. Let's call them the villain. Somebody out there that wants this to stop, and someone powerful says, you know what? This is bad. We don't want it. It's illegal. You can't do this anymore. Well, upon pain of death in America. What if they did that? I mean, first off, is that likely? Is it going in that direction? Second off, what happens if somebody doesn't like it? That all these new possibilities exist, because it all sounds wonderful, but there are people out there that may not like this.
So I've been thinking about this a lot, really before Bitcoin. So I was working on this problem in a different context. Virtual assets, don't really want to dive into that right now, but I've been thinking about this since before the Bitcoin paper was published. I frankly don't think that applied cryptography, which is ultimately what we're talking about, is any scarier to governments in its various forms. I think if a government doesn't want you to send a secret message between each other, they don't want you to use a blockchain. And we've had the Clipper chip for those of us who are a little bit older. There's been plenty of controversy in the United States around cryptography and your ability to maintain secrets amongst yourselves. And so in that vein, I think that blockchains are vilified to the same degree by the establishment. But in terms of the economic destruction that will be created or that will occur and what incumbents seek to stop that, the reality is lawyers are expensive. I like to believe that my time is competitively priced. So the unfortunate reality is that incumbents have a huge advantage in creating blockchain technology. And the reason the banks and finance is so aggressive in the blockchain space is because they rather disintermediate themselves or disrupt themselves than have some other organization come and do that. And when I talk to people, by far, the people who understand the technology the best are at banks. in part because they've been dealing with transactions and databases since the beginning of databases. So when I can say a sentence to them that would take 3 hours to explain to somebody else, and they're already sort of finishing it for me, and they're jumping in and they're really going for it. So in that sense, anyone who's radical, quick change of topic, or has some sort of issue with the government, I mean, of course, those people are going to continue to have problems. Those problems don't go away just because you use a blockchain. But if you're just trying to be compliant with your government, I mean, again, the government is basically the people who have the best guns, right? The best force, right? The most effective force, right? So wherever you are, sometimes there's, at one point, the third largest army in Colombia was the federal government, so in that situation, you got a lot of governments to worry about. If you're aligned with those people, you'll be fine. But if you're working against those people, frankly, I don't think blockchains provide you a lot of advantages. So I see it much more as an evolutionary change. I don't really see it as a revolutionary change. I think that the illicit sort of narrative around Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and crypto assets it's very sexy. It's great for marketing. Like, people are like, yeah, I get to buy drugs. This is awesome. And I'm like, I'm glad that those people are engaging in the process. But ultimately, it's still trivial to catch them. Their OPSEC is still slopsec, as we like to say. I mean, Bitcoin isn't going to magically turn you into a super criminal. So I don't see it as really ultimately having that much disruption to the status quo.
Fairly distributed from the start is the only reason I think Bitcoin as a currency is disruptive. And pretty much the whole world has kind of bent to its will, and it's starting to be included. And people are considering adding it to real regulated exchanges. So I think that's already done its damage. In terms of blockchain getting rid of government institutions or very large corporations, I don't know. I don't think necessarily that's going to occur. I think more so these Fortune 5s, if they're going to adapt this technology, they have far more resources to adapt it quicker than anyone else. I mean, people are learning about this technology, but there's still such a limited amount of independent developers trying to build things on these platforms, and there's so much politics around most of these projects that they're basically killing themselves and stopping themselves from progressing. And I'm hoping I'm wrong, right? I want blockchain to get further, and I want it to be larger scale projects to come out. But it's still in infant stages, and for all we know, there are actual threats to technology as well, in terms of the way things are set up. Without getting too technical, there are miners that verify things on the Bitcoin blockchain and on the Ethereum blockchain. They do proof of work, and it's those guys kind of have become cartels, and they work with each other to maximize the amount of money they could make on this platform, which at times goes against improvements on that platform. So it's once again, greed could kill this whole thing before it becomes at mass scale. So I mean, I'm hoping that's not the case, and I'm hoping some of the smartest people will step up. Not myself, but some of the other guys involved in space. But for the most part, I think don't expect a revolutionary change overnight. There are several possibilities on the table, but I don't think I think the players are going to step in, and Silicon Valley is going to eventually get in the game and use some of it.
So a few things. One, for our regulations in the U.S., I'm not a regulator, so not legal advice or talking on behalf of them, but the regulations are supposed to be technology agnostic with a goal to protecting, for example, the SEC is protecting consumers, right? And it's not supposed to matter whether you're doing this on a blockchain or doing this with some other kind of technology. So I think my impression is that regulators are trying to keep an open mind. They're just trying also to weed out fraudsters, scammers, others who are doing things not in compliance with existing laws, rather than trying to crack down on quote-unquote blockchain per se. I also think if you look, for example, in Delaware, as of August 1st, it changes to the Delaware General Corporations Law went into effect that allow, also known as the Delaware Blockchain Initiative, that allow shares to be registered on the blockchain in Delaware. They also have
When
previewed
did
that
that-
they,
When did that happen?
August 1st, it became effective. And there are really interesting public-private relationships, I won't name the companies, but that are involved with that. And they're predicting like smart UCCs for secure transactions. In Illinois, there was a pilot program in Cook County for putting real estate title on the blockchain. And there currently is a pilot program for putting birth certificates on the blockchain. So there's a lot of times, at least in the US, where the government really is looking into ways to embrace blockchain. Similarly, with what you said about the banks, I think that's entirely true. Initially, people thought, okay, the banks are going to be disintermediated, right? But then they looked at it and they said, wait a minute. For some of these blockchains, maybe not the public blockchain, but a permissioned blockchain, which is private, and only certain people can access it. They realized that they could realize tremendous cost savings and efficiencies by harnessing blockchain within some of their less efficient practices. So I think many of the people that you might think of as quote unquote like bad guys or incumbents there, and I don't think the banks are bad guys, let me just say that, or the government's bad guys, but that they're using it as well and finding advantages. And then finally, I think there is some concern that I have, and I won't go into too much detail about this, but I do have some concerns as governments speak out around the world about different things. And some governments, for example, in the token sale context, have, rather than saying that some of these may be unregistered sales of securities, you may know that, for example, China and South Korea, they actually shut down token sales and certain like secondary trading of tokens. What does concern me to a certain extent, and you alluded to this a little bit, is the idea that to the extent that you have many, many nodes in one particular jurisdiction, and somehow that jurisdiction were to somehow shut down the miners, but keeping the nodes, that could have a tremendous effect on the ability to validate transactions. So I won't go into more detail than that, but I do think that there are certain things that we need to figure out.
Cool. So you're involved in trading, investment, and you are too at some level, and I am at some level. Should the average person that's not an investment professional care about cryptocurrency and blockchain related trading and things like that? Because there's a lot of stuff happening in that space. Who's it relevant to?
Absolutely. I believe people who should care about the trading of cryptocurrencies for several reasons. First of all, it's a very good source of income, so to say. The prices increased from the beginning of the year, like I don't know, 5 times of Bitcoin, of only one asset. Maybe some other tokens increased much more, like around 20 times. So if you're looking from a financial perspective, the idea is you have to get in early. That's not a financial advice, so to say. Don't take it like. But if somebody like bought, maybe you guys heard about the case of 10,000 Bitcoins pizza.
Yeah.
There's somebody who paid 10,000 Bitcoins for a single pizza. Currently, that's an enormous amount of money.
Yeah.
And this was like 6 years ago, so it's not even that far. So so people should care from a financial perspective, and also for, as my colleagues here mentioned about tokens, about there are some applications that are raising awareness of the value of the electricity, for example, brought on a token. You digitalize electricity and you can trade it on an exchange, you can on a secondary market. You can trade your own mortgage. That's something that, for example, we're doing. You can list your mortgage, and you can if you're good in your good standing, you can create a shares on your mortgage, and you can actually sell it. And people, if they believe in you, they will be able to buy it. Right? So many use cases of trading where with, I wouldn't say cryptocurrency, but generally digital assets apply.
I think that is actually a really interesting concept of tokenizing the mortgage. I want to read something where this guy, Stephen McCone, wrote on he wrote this paper, you should look it up, called Traditional Asset Tokenization, in which he postulates that many traditional assets, which have before been very illiquid, like a mortgage, can now be represented by tokens, and now all of a sudden have a market to enable people to move in and out of them more easily. And he says here, Tokenization of traditional assets in the coming years will have an impact on liquidity across multiple asset classes. The implications of this statement are relevant to all investors, including both traditional and crypto. Tokenizing relatively illiquid assets and creating a market in which to trade these tokens can reduce the illiquidity discount substantially by reducing frictions to trade. Traditional assets will tokenize because they will lose the liquidity premium if they don't. What he's referring to is that when you take something like a mortgage that's hard to get in and out of, and now all of a sudden it's tokenized, so shares in that essentially can be traded, it's the value, you're going to be paying less of a premium to get into and out of it because it's more liquid. And so I think this is a very interesting idea that assets of all sorts could be tokenized, and you could potentially buy a 1/10,000th share in this building because it's a publicly traded token, for example. Or millions of representatives, depending on how much money you got.
Can I challenge that? What's the difference between a mortgage-backed security and that? And the liquidity challenge of if there's a financial crisis or something like that, the liquidity, who's going to want to buy it? And the same thing. I mean, I understand it's easier to do, but the same risk of mortgage-backed security or any asset-backed security.
So I mean, this is something that I worked on Omiseko. I've worked on a lot of different projects, energy, a lot of different stuff in terms of tokenization. And I think that fundamentally your point is valid in the sense that merely tokenizing the security or the asset doesn't eliminate the risks. But we also have to remember that in tokenizing it, we also have an irrevocable log of the history of that asset, which is something that certainly did not exist in the 2008 crisis, right? In fact, they didn't even know what mortgages referenced which instruments, right? They couldn't trace things back. Whereas on a blockchain, it'll be trivial to trace it back to the originating source. In fact, it'll be truly trivial. I mean, you'll look at your derivative and you'll immediately see all the things that are associated with it. And if we imagine blockchains permeate even greater than that, we'll be able to see in real time. I mean, depending on some of this is somewhat Orwellian, right? But you'll be able to say, okay, well, did this person go to work yesterday? And I have 1/1000th of their mortgage and they're sick. I mean, you'll be able to inspect in an amazing level if we decide to build out that infrastructure. So in that sense, it's fundamentally transformative because you're linking the securitized asset to the parent asset. The child and parent assets are all cryptographically linked and updated in real time. And so, although we usually describe it the way James described it, you're obviously a bit more sophisticated. So this other explanation is hopefully more
It's like a linking of data. It's a lot easier than tracing paperwork and public filing.
Yes, and it's actually, I mean, it becomes tractable, right? I mean, if we look at how interbank exchanges work right now today, like if you want to move money from Chase in London to Chase in Tokyo, the amount of complexity involved in that process, the amount of paper that is printed and touched and then stamped and then scanned and then emailed and then printed and then touched and then, I mean, so those systems are going to be eliminated ultimately by using applied cryptography from the 90s. And that's what's really going to, I mean, we can market it and call it blockchain, but really what we're doing is we're just making our databases work properly.
And then there's a lot less of a chance for things like, for instance, there was a recent case where Dole, the fruit company, their shares were called in because there was some controversy over Dole shares. And they had I checked the numbers on it, but they had 36,000 shares outstanding. They called them all in and they got like 48,000 shares brought back in. In other words, those shares were made up at some point and there was no record where some broker sold them twice. And we ultimately pay the price for that.
Yeah, that article, it's in Bloomberg. It's actually a really fascinating story if you're a nerd. Hopefully some of you are a little nerdy. But how that whole process, like how they failed, what their failure mode was, and when and how they detected that failure as a clearinghouse. I mean, it's DTCC, again, get into the weeds. Like they really screwed the pooch on that one, and there was no one holding them. There was no method for anyone to hold them to account. Whereas if there was a blockchain, at least there would be some method.
There was something else I want to say, but just follow this for a second. Actually, yeah, for that Dole case, that actually there was a footnote to that case where Vice Chancellor Laster of the Delaware Chancery Court said, hey, maybe this could be fixed for the blockchain. And that was actually part of what has led to the Delaware Blockchain Initiative. So previously, you would have even though you think you buy a share in Dole, okay, right? Really, you're just having an entry, and then your broker has an entry, and really, most of the shares, in almost every case, are owned by this company called Seed & Co., which is a nominee of DTC, right? And so, by having shares on the blockchain, that is a way that you could actually see who owns what, and you would hopefully avoid the challenge of finding out that you have colorable claims. Those weren't just fraud, like literally additional people, like something like 30% more people came forward with colorable claims to shares. So interesting.
Yeah.
And there's also, I guess, there's some other examples that are similar, but I'll skip over them just to go back to what I was going to say about how people should approach investing in cryptocurrencies and tokens. So I just, being the conservative view or person that I am, I think that if people do not have the technological sophistication and expertise to be able to evaluate, and also business expertise and sufficient funds, experience with investing, to be able to evaluate the white paper, the team, actual token, the likelihood of success, then I caution people against investing more than, say, like fun money, right? Like if you have like an extra $1 here or there, if you don't really understand what you're getting into. Now, I'm not saying that in my capacity as a lawyer, just saying this in my capacity as a person. So I think that that's important because, yes, the price of different cryptocurrencies has risen, but it's also been extremely volatile. And also, as some of our hedge fund clients have been seeing, trying to diversify among cryptocurrencies is really hard because many of them are roughly correlated with one another.
Very highly correlated. They're almost all correlated. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm aware I hedge.
But that also makes it extremely predictable.
So I'll just say they're all really highly correlated. I mean, it's pointed out that Bitcoin Ether is discorrelated, but there's some inside baseball stories around why Bitcoin and Ether were inverted, which we won't go into now. But to think of them, you can watch. I actually had a friend. I'll tell a little story. A good friend of mine had made his own cryptocurrency. It's Simon from. He did Dujo Music. He does a lot of other stuff. He had his own currency, and there was a run. Everything was going up in price, and he was the only miner left. So he knew exactly like who had all the currency, but there was trades going on over on an exchange network. And he's like, well, why is there any activity going on at all? Like I just have my single miner running at my house, not doing anything. And ultimately, what caused that was as people are trying to operate within these networks, within the exchanges, they need to diversify. They need to take their position out of Bitcoin or take their position out of Ether, and there's just not enough market depth. So they'll take their position into anything else they possibly can that's traded on that exchange, in any exchange that there is. And because there's decentralized exchanges, you can literally be trading on anything to get out of that position. And so when we talk about, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little technical here, but when we're talking about correlation, I mean, these markets are really, I don't want to get too conspiratorial here, but they're much smaller markets than what one might imagine. And so, like, one of the things that we do at Omega One, and I'm sure your product as well, what we're doing is we're providing depth to these markets, so that we actually will be able to have diversified assets, so that we actually will be able to have a robust ecosystem. And I think that if you want to trade or if you want to participate, it's absolutely money you should be willing to lose. Just because, I mean, the volatility, it's not like you're going to be able to get it back on Wednesday. I mean, the price of Bitcoin moves like 40% in a day. I mean, that's not unheard of. That's not your house, that's not your car, that's not your food. I mean, very few things in your life will move 40% in any direction in a day, and Bitcoin does it pretty regularly.
So I think that is actually an awesome segue into another meetup. We should do all about crypto trading. Because that's a whole other can of worms. It's awesome, but it is 7:30, and we're supposed to go till 7:30. But I think we should just take a little bit for a couple questions, and then we'll end it up.
Pass the mic around.
Yeah, go.
I'll speak loud. I just wanted to it's okay if you can link it back to identity, but I kind of like the demo update and example. Thanks for that. So I want to push more in depth on like cryptocurrency versus digital currency, right? Because I think you think Pokemon Go in-app purchases between games, you buy some virtual currency. Well, I guess the keyword there is virtual currency, right? So in the media wow, it's gonna be everywhere as we digitize everything with IoT. You know, so as a company, as an innovator, as whatever, an individual mortgaging your home, like, where do you draw the line between creating your own virtual currency, it could be a cryptocurrency, it could be something much simpler, versus using something already there? So is there like a danger of having too many currencies?
Absolutely.
Or should we go crazy and like create each one in our name?
So, for my clients, I actually answer this question regularly, and I disagree with my clients. I mean, my clients oftentimes want me to, do things that I recommend against. That's why they're paying me. And so I think that right now, where we are in the space, the liquidity simply isn't there for us to create assets all willy-nilly all over the place. As the exchange technology matures, as exchanges become more ubiquitous, as exchanges become more automated, as we have a way of preserving privacy, I really have some critical things to say about Bancor, but I thought that the concept was like brilliant and obvious. Like we need Bancor. And for those of you who don't know, you should go read about it because it's too complicated to get into now. But we need technology to provide liquidity before we can really tokenize everything that I think should be tokenized. And so to answer your question more directly, I think yes, everything, almost nearly anything that you transact should be tokenized. Very few things I think shouldn't be tokenized. Well, ironically with identity, your personal identifying information should not be tokenized, because that's somewhat of a misnomer, right? If it's your private information and you've tokenized it, then in some way it's become public. So that's somewhat oxymoronic. But aside from situations like that, anything that's fungible should probably be tokenized. It would be better for all the counterparties involved in those transactions to have the tokenized version of that asset.
Quick follow-up, and that'll be my last. So in that version, if you separate identity, right, you're trying to lock that in some separate box, are there going to be different versions of identity? Because I think the default identity now becomes your wallet, and so could you attach something to that?
Yeah, so I was at Consensus when Uport was being developed at its very early stages, and I thought a lot about that problem, and for those of us who are familiar with computer security, there's something called a correlation attack, where effectively what happens is, although you think you have separated one identity from another, because they go to sleep at the same time, because they like the same sandwiches, because they have the same favorite color, people can figure out that in fact it's the same identity. And so I think that there will be all of these different platforms. There will be, I think that identity will be primarily reputation-based. So you'll have this identifier, and they call them DIDs. There's a lot of identity work, this decentralized identifier, digital identifier. And for each person, there will be potentially millions or thousands of identifiers per person. And then you will have the best chance of linking all of your identities together. But if I'm your girlfriend, or if I'm a crazy stalker, or if I'm a network operator, if I operate your ISP, for example, I will have the opportunity to statistically speaking, I'll be better at linking your identities than other people. And so I think a lot of times when we talk about identity on the blockchain and just digital identity more broadly, it's not really a fully informed discussion. And so I think that a blockchain is awesome for authorization and authentication and certain types of attestation, all A words for whatever reason. But actually storing the data itself, you should do that in private, and it should not be on a blockchain.
Okay.
Two or three more, depending on the length.
Hi. Very informative panel discussion. Thank you. I have a question regarding the smart contracts. In a simplified way, is it just a collection of simple commands, conditional commands based on, for example, to your example about the betting for the World Series?
Yeah.
What triggers the commands?
Yeah, so the issue here, so there's a couple examples given by both of these kind of people. So there's pros and cons, right? So if we imagine a dice game, so we can, the worst thing to ever put on a blockchain, also the easiest thing to put on a blockchain that'll make you an enormous amount of money, it's a horrible idea, I won't tell you why, is to bet on the next block nonce. So each block has a name. If you just placed any set of bets on what the name is supposed to be random. And so it's supposed to be completely impossible to guess. And so this is a bet that you can make very easily. You can bet on what the name of the next block. And I won't get into why that's a horrible idea, but it's a horrible idea. But that's a very simple bet because it's entirely in the blockchain. You don't need to do anything, you don't need to get any information from outside the blockchain to place this bet and pay out this bet. If you have a bet on the World Series is interesting because there is the MLB, they're an authority, so that authority can create an oracle and they can inject into the blockchain that information, and everyone will believe it because it's from MLB, and then there's questions about how do you inject that securely, yada, 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 a lot of details, but in theory it works. Then there's other things that are much harder to actually wager on. Did it rain in New York? It rained in part of New York. It rained on Tuesday. It didn't rain on Wednesday. You can imagine a wager that it would be impossible to have a fair payout for. And so how would you even use an oracle to inject that information into the blockchain to even pay out that wager? So I spent a lot of time thinking about that problem too. Yeah.
Regarding the private blockchain that you pointed out, Brad, this is a big takeaway for me.
Yeah.
So with regards to companies doing initial coin offerings, does that also mean that the companies need to have the proper infrastructure, and enough computing power to process the blocks?
That's a great question. I'm surprised. That's exactly why some of these ICOs are scams, right? Because it's like they're issuing tokens, and it's a private blockchain, so it's like the people who control essentially the value of these tokens is all one group, in a sense. It doesn't even make sense, really, to issue tokens to people that are not part of this consortium if you're doing a private blockchain. I mean, because the only people who are going to be using it are like a private group of individuals. So by you having tokens that they would use, you're basically part of their group, which, I mean, it's a possibility. Like if let's say 5 of us own 5 different businesses and we wanted to create our own private blockchain and we did like an ICO for our private friends and family of tokens we'd be using on this platform, it's possible. But like, I mean, essentially the people who are the actors within that blockchain can make it cease to exist. You can change it. You can all get in a group and decide to alter the data, and it's possible. So it kind of defeats the purpose. There's a huge debate because it's like for companies internally, it makes a lot of sense to have private blockchains just to get rid of a lot of the overhead we talked about, like the paperwork and stuff like that, where it's like we don't need the whole world to agree on this, but even if internally as a company we could all agree, that'd be huge, and we could save a lot of like the paperwork and a lot of the middlemen we have to use within the company in order to verify certain transactions. But generally, I mean, this is my opinion, but like generally, I stay away from projects that like issue tokens for private blockchains, simply because I don't know if I can trust the people issuing it, unless it's like an incredible project. There's something that you pointed out that I didn't possibly notice before.
Do these private distributed ledgers communicate with each other?
People are trying to create projects that allow like cross-blockchain communication. There's several. Polkadot?
So there's Polkadot, there's Cosmos, there's the one from Blockstream, which I'm drawing a blank on right now on the blockchain, on the Bitcoin side of things. So, and there's also like IPLD is another protocol that can be used to do cross-chain communication. The company I worked at before I started my consultancy is Monax, and Monax did almost entirely federated proof-of-stake networks. So almost all of what we did at the time was private networks. I think there's a lot of utility for them. I think that it's ultimately going to be the future. I think when we talk about issuing your own token, you're going to issue it on your own blockchain, and then that blockchain will dynamically and in real time talk to the main blockchain to keep track of things as necessary. So that main blockchain will probably be branded Ethereum. I suspect technologically it'll be completely different from Ethereum today. And then that blockchain may also be using Bitcoin to actually transfer value, because Bitcoin, as mentioned, really is quite good at transferring value, and frankly not much else. So I mean, that's sort of the future that I envision, is that we will all be operating and interacting with private blockchains all the time, and we won't probably be using that language. Just like cloud computing used to be called grid computing in the 90s, and then somehow some marketing thing happened, and the exact same technology got rebranded and became all over the place. And I'm sure there's someone at IBM who thought up grid computing was like hitting themselves in the head because they didn't think of cloud computing instead as a different name. I don't think we're going to be talking about private blockchains. I think we'll be talking about, like, you know, crypto database. I don't know. It's going to be some weird buzzy name.
I've started hearing peer-to-peer sort of transactions.
All right, I'm going to call it, because this is awesome. I could talk about this for another 2 hours, but there's this threshold of antsiness I know that is in any crowd like this, and we're hitting it. So what I propose is that if you want to continue talking about this, come up here and talk to us.